Welcome, welcome. So yeah, this is what we're up to today. Today is going to be knitting on these. It's a custom and commissioned order pair of leg warmers. And actually this is the right side of the fabric. There we go. And we're about 2/3 of the way done one leg warmer, which is exciting, because yes. I actually have a second commission in progress as well that I'll be doing when I finish this one. So yeah. But like I said, I'm on row 140 of 200, and this is a modified version of these leg warmers. So let me show you. So in the original, I made this pattern before I really understood how to grade and size properly. So I'm changing the increases in this to better work with like the shaping of a leg at a larger size. So that is what I'm doing with this, and I'll eventually incorporate what I'm doing in this back into the main pattern for a pretty substantial update. Yeah, no, they're knit flat because it's going to be zippered. So the way this pattern works is they're knit flat and they either button or zipper up. Anyway, what I want to show you folks, so this is the leg warmer pattern that I'm working on, and it's either buttons or zipper. So that's why they're knit flat, because then you either have buttons running up the side or you have a zipper. This was because when I made these, my premise was I wanted a pair of leg warmers that I didn't have to take my boots off to get the leg warmers off. Because a lot of leg warmers are a knitted tube, and that means if you want your boots off, you have to put them over the boots, and you still have to take the boots off to get the leg warmers off. So I wanted a pair that the buttons are zippered up, and that's what I'm making. So that's what we're working on today. Except we are doing a rainbow version. No, yes, these are flat, and that's why. Because these will eventually be zippered. Not looking forward to putting the zipper in, but that's what it's going to be. And I have misplaced the other needle. Like, I literally had it a second ago, and now it is gone. Success! So we're on row 140 of this massive chart. I will show you the ridiculous chart. This will not be the final version of the update, by the way, the chart that I'm going to show you, because this is just a proof of concept for me. This chart is absolutely monstrous. I will not be, like, this is just the, can I do this, how do I structure this test? The actual, updated pattern will not look like this. This is a full 200 row chart. No, I will condense this into, like, a couple repeats. But this was the proof of concept of how do I set this all up. So, this is knit flat. Our chart is read from front to back and then back to front, which is always fun when reading charts flat. There's no wear ends in this particular pattern. So it's why, if you go to the chart, I'm going to zoom all the way in. Welcome to the draft chart. So this is right side purl, wrong side knit, and so on. Yeah, that's why it does that. The reason these are not labeled as right side, wrong side, the knit together and SSSK and knit three together, is because I went through and removed that because they only happen on the right side of the work. I need to do that on this too. All the wrong side ones, they only happen. All the increases only happen on the right side, so I can remove the wrong side instruction. But yeah, this is right side and wrong side because you do knit back and front. And I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to zoom a little bit out on this, just so that I can... This is what I do with these ginormous charts when I make them. Like I said, this is the proof of concept chart for me. When I publish the pattern, it will not look like this. So we're looking at chart row 140, which is over here, where my mouse is. I don't know if you can see that. And we're just going to work across from left to right, with the dots on the, because it's wrong side, being knits, and the plain stitches being purls. This is actually part of how I do pattern support, so if people have questions about like my patterns, they can come here on Twitch and ask them live. This is part of how I teach, so I'd be doing this anyway. Oh, am I getting a cat delivery? I'm getting a cat delivery. One moment, please. No joke that when the cats show up on the stream, sometimes I get more viewers. It's really funny. There we go, cat. Hi. Hang on, let me adjust. There you go. Make a hex buff. Cool. Alright, I will actually change that up and do that right now. Yep, actually, I will start on the hex buff, like, right now, because I can actually do that this stream. So, that's what I'm going to be doing today. Change of plans. As soon as I finish petting a cat, I will reconfigure the commands and jump over to make hex buffs. But in the interim, I have a cat. Now we're going to do a quick switch, because apparently I have to go make hex buffs, because Dan redeemed one. Alright, success. I found the things. So we're making hex buffs. It is a blanket that looks like this, but the thing is, I have mini skeins to play with. So I got a bunch of these little mini skeins. They're little ones from the Frogger Niagara, who is where I ordered some yarn for a commission from. And these are like, yeah, so that's what these are. These are little mini skeins, and they were included in my order. And like I said, I ordered from them for a commission. And the Frogger Niagara, their entire shop is let's take sweaters apart for yarn. That's what they do, and I love it because he keeps like, yarn out of landfill, and they also get some really glorious stuff. Like, you can get 100% cashmere for super cheap because it's just the thrift store sweater that this person has recycled and reused. And in the order, they tucked a whole bunch of these little, like, ends. So I'm like, perfect for the blanket. So these are all pretty thin, so I don't know how much I'm going to get out of them, so I'm going to probably double them, I think. And first we have to wind them up. So there we go. If they're thin, I'll work them. If they're going to be too thin, then I'll hold them double. Oh. Figure out exactly how one undoes this. Because I've just tucked this right over my knees. And then I'm going to just... Oh, this is... I don't like cutting the yarn, but I might have to in this case. I'm going to use the tip of my scissors to try and undo the tie around the skein. Right, that got some of that. Let's see. I got it. Yay! So now we've got this. And I just... Oh! Nope, that was an end. Okay. So again, I've got a couple like small little ties. So I'm just going to take this, and I'm going to be tucking the... I just use the very tip of my scissors because they're quite pointy. Without being, you know, stabby pointy. And I see what I can kind of just tuck underneath and see what I can do. There's our end. Yays! This is very, very fine. This is lace weight. This is absolutely lace weight. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be probably working this with doubles, so that's okay, I can do that. So I'm just going to hand wind this ball because I'll probably go through it in a single day. If I weren't willing to store this at all, I would use it when everyone else to it, but I'm just going to wind it over my fingers because, and yes, I'm sitting with my knees just up and out. That's how I keep my skeins intact. Or when I'm winding them, I just do that. So yeah, we switched over from light warm knitting to hexbuff knitting, and this yarn is kind of fragile, which makes sense because it's very, very thin. So there may be a bit of slicing involved, and if so, we'll deal with it. So all of the yarn that Frogger Niagara sells comes from these recycled sweaters. And so a lot of it is very thin. So yeah, I'll definitely work this held double, and it might even be a multicolored hexbuff if I end up needing more than 2 skeins. Not all, but a lot of the yarn that's in our shop is like super fine lace weight, fingering weight of best. But since a lot of commercial knit sweater yarn is very, very thin, it's not surprising that this is super thin yarn. It's lace weight, like by a long shot, which is fine. Which is why I'm holding it double for the hexbuffs. Tangenting, the way I make custom order stuff is I order the yarn with the customer's kind of intent. So I'll walk through like, okay, what are you looking for? And then I'll show them like, okay, I would go here and order this, or I'd be looking at this. If they're local to me, barring COVID, I would even take them into a local yarn store and be like, what do you help them guide them to what fibers they want? You know, are they a yarn allergy? Are they vegan? Are they comfortable with acrylic yarn? What would they like? So on and so forth. If they're not local, I still have those kind of conversations over email. And one of the things that I do is I'm like, here, I know this person, the shop, that they do reclaimed yarns, and that's how you can get luxury yarns like the cashmere for much, much cheaper because it's reclaimed. And so I had a custom order for a commission come in using their yarn, and the mini skeins were included in the order, just as a very, very kind little gift. So that's the first ball. I'm going to double these, so I'm going to have to bind up a second one. Well, this might be a marled hexbuff. If it ends up that like the 2 little balls are not going to be enough, we're going to find out. So let's go with, since Dan's name always appears in green, let's go in this pale green for Dan as well. Okay, we just take it, you untwist it. It's going to kink back up on itself. Take it apart like so. Put it over the knees and find your end, which is there it is. Again, and then I'm going to use the tip of my embroidery scissors because it's relatively sharp without being too sharp, as long as I keep the blades closed. And I just slide it underneath where the yarn has been tied off and see if I can get underneath a knot. Can't? Well, then I can't. Let's see. It's a very secure skein. That's a good thing. Nope, I'm going to do something a little smaller for this particular knot, so I'm going to go into one of my little needles. Just my tapestry needle here. It's got a bit of a sharper edge than the scissors. A bit of a finer edge, I should say, than the scissors. And I'm just going to try to slide it under 1 or 2 strands of where the yarn has been tied off. These are very secure mini skeins. When I ordered the actual yarn from Frogger Niagara, it came in a ball. So I will not have this issue. It's already been pre-caked. I don't think that got it, unfortunately. We're going to find out. It did not. I've got it loose. It's just a case of getting it undone. Like I said, the actual yarn that I ordered, it came nicely caked. So if you do order from Frogger Niagara, you will not have this issue around trying to undo the mini skeins. This is actually one of the most stubborn mini skeins I've ever had. So, ha 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 ha, success. I know not everybody agrees with that, but I find winding yarn very, very meditative. There we go. I like some lace weight. I find it can depend on the lace weight, whether it's a pain in the butt to work with or not. Okay, so I've got another tied off spot over here, so I'm going to bring it over here and do the same thing. It's just a question of loosening this up enough. And like I said, I'm using a tapestry needle for this. You can use anything that's got a good kind of nice point to it that's not going to cut the yarn. I got it under, so now I just have to get it loosened up. Extra yarn fluff there, and I think that got it. There we go. I find some lace weight can be a real pain, especially if it's a lace weight that comes apart really easy, and others is perfectly fine. We're going to start it on just 2 fingers, wrap around a lot. I want a lot of my yarn this way. And people go like, why? The answer is I have an Nosta Bene, so if I were winding more yarn than just mini skeins, I would break out my Nosta Bene. But the other reason is because this means I need nothing. What do I mean by that? I mean that I have wound yarn on a bus. That I have wound yarn on a 5-hour train ride, and I didn't need my Swift. I just took the skein, put it over my knees like this, and wound. You need pants, shorts, or a longer skirt for this to function, but otherwise it's fine. And it is actually, like, first off, really convenient, like I said, because I have wound just yarn, like, at my train seat. And people are like, what are you doing? Because I knew, because I knew it was going to be a thing. Actually, you know what, I'll do story time on that one. So I was traveling, for those who know Canada, it was Toronto to Kingston for a festival. It was about a 4.5-hour train ride, and on the way up, I knew that I was going to want to knit, because it was a long train ride. And Via Rail, which is the Canadian equivalent of Amtrak, Wi-Fi is not bad, but it's not great. It can be questionable whether or not you're going to be able to connect. So, yeah. Alright, so. Like, okay, I knew I wanted to do something to do, so I'm like, okay, I will bring my knitting, and it's going to be great, and that's perfectly fine. Cool, alright. But I also realized the project I was working on at the time, I knew that I would need another yarn skein balled up for. So, I took my Nosta Bene and I wound it exactly like I'm doing now on the train. People were quite surprised. People were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm winding yarn. The other thing with this is because the Via Rail seats are like 2 and 2, I didn't have to bother like my seatmate doing this or anything like that. So I just kind of brought my knees up a little bit. It was a little bit awkward to do it for the long term, but I folds for easy storage. And what do I mean by that? I have what seems to be a neurodivergent tendency to like sit with my feet not in like the normal chair position. I am actually more comfortable with my knees like kind of curled up like this or sitting cross-legged on the floor than I am like in the quote-unquote normal chair position. And it seems to be a thing among like ADHD and other neurodivergent people that they tend to not sit quote-unquote traditionally in chairs. So for me, this was fine. I was comfortable. My seatmate, my seatmate, the person who was sitting in the other chair beside me, and the thing is because the Via Rail seats, even the economy seats, are not airline seats. You have space. So it meant that I could do this and not disturb my seatmate. I don't know if I could do this in like economy plane. I think I might have disturbed a seatmate. Okay, so I've got a couple extra strands here because this did come apart. So we're gonna wind these up as well. There's gonna be overlapping of the yarn. They're going to have some extra ends and stuff that I'm going to have to overlap, and I'll have them all tucked on the inside of the hex buff. So that's not a big deal. This is a scrap yarn project anyway, so it's a couple extra tagging ends. That's really not the end of the world. So the one problem with this is that because it is easy to put a little bit too much extra pressure on the yarn in the skein, you can do what I've just done here and accidentally snap a strand or two of the really fine yarns. So, and that's my own fault. That's, user error. I don't know what fibers these are. By the way, I don't know. I know that like Niagara Fogger goes like when you order, it'll tell you what like the order you're putting in is, or like what your type of yarn it is. But the mini skeins are not labeled with fiber content, so that's the reason why I'm using them in the hex buff blanket, because legally I couldn't put them into something I was selling, because under Canadian textile law, if I was putting them into something I was going to sell, I have to know what the fibers are. And for a pattern, it's like if I want to use them in a knitting pattern, I don't have to know, but it's so much easier to recommend yarn substitutions if I know what the fiber is. So there we go. That's what we're doing today. All right. Now we're going to actually get into the actual knitting of said hex buff. So I'm going to take one strand of each, and I'm going to work this held double. Like I said, I may end up having to marl this because one of these balls is obviously bigger than the other. The white is... this one in front is obviously bigger than the one behind. So let's throw our cast on. So we're going to give ourselves a good bit of space. We're going to do our slip knot, as usual, and we're going to do our Jenny's Magic cast on. I always forget, is it Jenny's Magic cast on or Judy's Magic cast on? I never remember these things. There's our cast on, so we loop this over our back needle. And when you're working with yarn held double, it's really no different than working with yarn not held double. You just gotta be a bit more cautious that where you kind of make sure you pick up both strands when you're working. I left myself far too long a tail, but that's okay. 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 5. Cool. 6, 7, 7, 8, 8, 8, 9, 9, 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, there we go. Yay! Alright. So I left myself much longer than I needed at the bottom, but that's okay. Let's start knitting, shall we? So after your cast on, you knit 1 row around. So this may be a bit loose on these needles. If that's the case, I will actually just ball up a 3rd ball and knit this triple. I don't think I need to. It's a bit thin, but I think it'll work. Come on, I'm having some tension problems here. This does not want to be... Why are you being difficult? There we go. Cast on just being a bit fiddly. I want to be sure I picked up those strands, which is the challenge when you're working with yarns held double. You want to be sure that you've picked up those strands of yarn. So we're going to flip this, and we're going to do 10 stitches the other way. That's our first row. Or first round. If you're looking for an actual pattern for it, you can look at the Beekeeper's Blanket on Ravelry. Actually, I would honestly suggest just looking up a Hexbuff blanket. There's different varieties of this particular pattern. So yeah, so we've done our first round. So now we're doing our increase round, and I'm also going to find and stick in one of my stitch markers. Just so I don't lose wherever I'm at with this. So, someone actually asked me once, like, oh, do the Hexbuffs, they get in the way of your studio work? Technically, yes, they do. But I enjoy them, and also, like, this is, again, a great way to use up scrap projects. So even doubled, this is pretty thin yarn. I am glad that I held this doubled. It would be it would be too thin for Hexbuff if I didn't. But it is still quite thin. So this is going to be a looser Hexbuff, which is not the end of the world, again, because this is a scrap yarn product. If this were, like, an amigurumi that I was selling, I would probably add in another strand or use a different yarn. But it's a scrap yarn project for me, so it really doesn't matter. Like I said, we're making Hexbuffs today. I have an extra needle. Just stick that in the blanket. So this might be a marled Hexbuff, because I think I'm probably going to run out of yarn and have to just marl in another one. So that's just going to be a thing. That's okay. But no, I am very happy I found the Frogger Niagara, because I have tried to unravel thrift store sweaters, and it was an exercise in frustration for me. But I also appreciate that it's a really good way to, in some cases, get very luxury yarns. If you unravel a cashmere sweater, you get cashmere. You know, that's not exactly cheap. Another thing is, very often, a unraveled or recycled cashmere sweater, is going to be the higher quality than some cashmere you will be able to buy. Now, I'm going to go into a bit of a tangent. Why? Because if you have a recycled cashmere sweater, it's probably an older cashmere sweater that is being reclaimed at a thrift store or recycled in that sense. New cashmere, quote-unquote virgin cashmere, in that it's come from the cashmere goats. Cashmere goats only are in a specific area of the world, and the demand for cashmere has soared in the last 5 years or so. The problem is cashmere goats are getting sheared earlier and earlier, which actually is affecting animals' welfare because they then don't have their winter coats. So they're just having issues of warmth in the winter because they're being sheared earlier and earlier in the year. So because the animal's stressed, their cashmere is not as high quality. So actually, the general quality of cashmere has actually been going down in about the last 5 years or so because of this. Now, I'm not saying you can't find ethically sourced animal welfare protected cashmere. Of course you can. But, you know, most fast fashion brands, they don't care about that. So they're going, hey, we're a cheap fast fashion clothing company. We can provide cheap cashmere. Of course we're going to do it. You know, yeah, you can see what that goes. Either you have serious animal welfare issues, or if they are going back to the animals that are being farmed more traditionally and supporting those groups, they're pressuring the farmers to shear earlier than they really should for the animal welfare. So yeah, cashmere's actually got problems. If you are looking for cashmere, one of the best ways to get good quality cashmere for knitting is to recycle cashmere sweaters. So I am really, really happy I found them, because like I said, I have tried to unravel sweaters, and it is not my skill set. It is not as easy as people think it is. I know a lot of people who do it. There are a lot of people in knitting forums and etc. who will talk about how to do this, and it's great, and I am, go for it. I tried once, and it was a lot of just frustration, a lot of broken yarn. And I'm like, you know what? I will leave this to somebody else, and I will pay them to do that for me. Thank you. The thing is, when you unravel a sweater, yarn is very, very fine. Usually. There are exceptions. You will find chunkier yarns when you unravel, but they're rarer. And which means that it's very easy to break your yarn. It's easy to apply it to get it to a yarn that would be something a hand knitter would use. The other thing, and I'm in tangent into like garment construction here because this is like my fiber nerd is showing now. So when you have a sweater, a commercially made sweater, not a hand knit sweater, what you have is you have one of two options. Either it's knit in the same way you would hand knit. You go back and forth across your rows and pieces. So you knit your front, you knit your back, so on and so forth. You might have parts knit in the round. It might, that's a thing commercial knitting machines can do. Or you have what's called a die-cut sweater. What they do is they print literally sheets of, let's say, cabled knit fabric, and they literally stamp out the sweater parts and sew them together. If it is the former, if it's been machine bed knit, commercial knitting bed, machine bed knit, like that, then you can unravel the yarn no problem. If it is the latter, you will end up with a lot of small little pieces of yarn and it will be an act in utter frustration. And it can be hard to tell the difference. The best way to do is look at your seams. Look at like where the sweaters come together and see what the seams look like, but even then, the seams can be hard to tell. So that's the first problem. You can get sweaters that are unravelable because you end up with a bazillion pieces of small yarn rather than one long, contiguous, useful piece of yarn. That is problem number one. Next up, we're doing an increase row. So the way these work basically is you increase every other row to make basically a wonky hexagon. And then you decrease every other row, or to make the other side of the hexagon. And after that, like that's basically what it is. Okay, so I have hit the first where one of my yarn is snapped. So I'm actually going to use the yarn bowl hook and keep them in place. There we go. Oops, this should be an increased row. Come on, there we go. This is a bit experimental because I haven't worked with this yarn, so looking forward to this. So I have two commissions immediately on the go. One of them is the legworms that I showed you earlier, and the other isn't the yarn at hand, but it is the yarn that I purchased from Frogger Niagara to become a pair of mittens. Okay, so now, what have I got? So now, because I have the end of the one half of that green, so I'm going to pick up the end of it. Oopsies. And just overlap it for a couple stitches. This is going to be, you're going to be difficult, aren't you? Yes, you are. Ah, I am in the middle of trying to join in yarn. No. Okay, let's do this. There we go. Is this an increase row? Yes, it is, I think. 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. This should be 18. If I'm wrong, then I will find out momentarily. As I mentioned before, I attempted to unravel the sweaters myself and ended up needing far too much adult beverages and a lot of frustration. So I was like, I will pay someone else to do this, thank you, because no. I would also then pay someone else to unravel sweaters for me, because yeah. So right now we're working on a hex buff. We're coming up on our 45-minute break, which is perfectly fine. I'm hoping that I can get to like the halfway point of the hex buff before we break, but we will find out if that happens or not. I mean, like I said, my worry about doing blankets for craft shows would be just the sheer amount of work involved in a blanket, but you can do it. Because as always, I've managed to distract myself. We're not going to be finishing this before I take my break, but that's okay. So let me finish this needle, and then we'll be taking a break. And when I come back, there will be... I'm just going to go up and get more tea. That's all I'm going to do. And when I come back, we're going to finish up the hex buff. 2, 4, 6, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. This should be increased. Okay, cool. Alright, so we've got a couple more rows to do before we start decreasing. And something is going to wonky with my tension here, so I'll have to fix that too. That's all that was. Alright. See you in a bit. I'm going to go get some tea. Much better. Now I am caffeinated. As if I wasn't before, but hey. Now, where did I put the hex buff? There it is. Alright. Let's see. That's my tail. Gotta find the ends. Here we go. There's our end. Alright. 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, something weird happened here, that's for sure. Hang on. Something has gone wonky here. Give me one moment, please. What the heck? I see. Okay. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17, 18. Don't know why this is being so difficult, but it is, so that's okay. 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Sorted. Just stitch was sitting funny and it was causing me problems. So now this is a standard plain knitting row. I have some new mini skeins that I'm making. These little extra skeins that I'm making some hex buffs out of right now. That's what we're testing today. They are remnants from old sweaters, so that's kind of cool. Alright, so I'm going to need to wind up another skein because I have used all of this skein, or if I have, there's only a tiny bit left and it has gone also into the ether along with the emails. So yeah, this is the another little mini skein here, and we're going to be rewinding this. Now I'm going to take this hex buff, I'm going to wind this, or this mini skein, I'm going to wind this one, and then I will find a cat. So I thought we might burn through these faster because they're very small and they're very light. So again, I'm doing exactly the same thing as we were doing here, except tangling them apparently. I'm gonna flip this because that's where the first tie is here. So scoot back so you folks can not see this any better, but at least get a better idea of what I'm doing. This is one thing I couldn't do with the crafting camera anyway, so there we go. So I will wind and then I will find a cat. I'm not actually sure where he is right now. I need something a little bit thinner, so I'm going to go over to one of my tapestry needles for this. The tapestry needles are great because they have a very dull tip, so they're less likely to get in between the plies and break the yarn. But they're still perfect for something like this. These are, however, the most secure mini skeins I've ever had to unravel. I will say that. Oh, I've got another tie. Let's switch this around. I did not see that one originally, so we're going to let that hang for a second. Pick up the same needle I just put in the yarn bowl, and try this again. I know exactly where the skittish one is. I'm not sure where the Liam is, but he can't have gone too far. There we go. There we go. Success. Ish. I now have 2 ends. That's okay. Alright, we'll fix that. There we go. And I've just got this basically looped around my knees, and we're just going to do a very quick, like, wind up of this. Not hard. I thought this might happen, because there's not a lot of yarn to these. They're very, very small. They were sent with the purposes of mending, or for exactly this kind of scrap project. So, it's... And there's one of them anyway. That's one. So... Oops. What happened here? There we go. So the only downside to doing it this way is that you end up with this issue of, you end up with the issue that you can stretch the skein too far, like what I've done here. So, what's going on over here? What's happened over here? I've got kind of a tangled over here, and I don't know quite how that happened. But that's okay, we will deal with it. Okay, so... It's actually kind of a tangled mess. Okay, that worked. So this one is actually going to turn into, has just turned into a lot of short pieces because I snapped it. That is user error on my end, so we'll deal with that. So any of the ridiculously short pieces, they're just going to go into the scrap, but the longer pieces, they will be saved and used as XBuff pieces. So I've got a couple of these pieces here that I will just use, and that will be perfectly fine. We'll see if it gets me to the end of the hexbuff or not. If it doesn't, that's the little... If it does, yay! Alright, so... Just tuck those, lay those over there so I don't lose them. Okay, and in the meantime, we're gonna work with this. So, here we go. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take my first piece, I'm just gonna lay it in, and I will begin working with that. Cool. Don't know why that one gave me so much trouble in the unraveling process. Let me fasten this in, and I'll go find a cat. So because this is a scrap yarn project, I'm just tying these in by overlapping them for a couple stitches, because it's much, much easier. If this were something where I were being judged on it, or if it were a sample from a magazine, I would be much more worried about it, and I just lost my stitch marker. Where'd that go? Where did my stitch marker go? I'm not... Oh, there it is. Alright. This is going to be an increased row, so I'm going to pause for half a second. Going to go briefly AFK, I'm going to go find a cat.